Hi, everybody. My name is David Muriel, and I'm an AI researcher with LanceDB. Today, I'm joined by Dave Graham, who's been exploring some very interesting use cases with our product. Given his complex use case, Dave needed a simple tool to solve real-world problems. Today, we're going to dive into his journey, what drew him to LanceDB, how he's using the product in practice, and what others can learn from his experience. This is one of those conversations that's really exciting to us who work on the product itself because we get to meet adaptable and creative developers like Dave. So without further ado, welcome Dave. Thanks for coming
Nice,
by.
nice to be here. Appreciate the invite.
And where I'm actually really glad we connected through Reddit. I just came across your post totally by accident. Saw that you were almost evangelizing LanceDB. That's how excited you were about the product. So I thought that was really cool.
No, certainly. I mean, Reddit's become a gold mine. It's the new overflow of vector databases and anything to do with the tooling thereabouts. And so, yeah, no, it was great. I appreciate the engagement there.
Yeah. So let's start with your background a bit. Can you start by sharing about who you are, what you're working on, and really what led you to explore LanceDB in the first place?
Sure. So my name is Dave Graham. I'm the director of marketing for ML Commons, which is a large nonprofit that's focused around artificial intelligence and benchmarking and basically providing information in different areas, both AI risk and reliability, AI data sets, benchmarking, profiling, performance, as well as research alongside of that. So we're a big organization spanning the globe. Yeah, and I've been in the industry, so to speak, since about 2007, longer than that, if I count my personal contributions. But I've worked for a lot of the major providers that are out there just in the data and storage space, networking space, compute space. And now I'm back on the AI side, and it's been a very long, circuitous journey to get here. So I'm pretty stoked to be in the place I'm at right now.
So one of the things that you mentioned when we were talking initially, you said you were using ChatGPT or Claude, and that's how you totally randomly came across LensDB. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true. I used GPT 3.0, right, back in the good old days. I used it to structure a lot of my PRDs and kind of doing some initial groundwork research and what I wanted to accomplish. And a lot of what I would ask it was along the lines of, hey, I need something that's forward looking, that's kind of cutting edge, but not bleeding edge, right? That's going to support these goals. And as you know, a lot of what you do within the agentic space is learning how to ask good questions to get good results. And so, yeah, ChatGPT, provided several, alternatives in that space based on, the language I wanted to use, which was Python, as well as kind of integration to all the different moving bits and pieces. And yeah, LanceDB was recommended as part of it.
One of the things I notice is that people choose the product based on kind of the data set they're working with and the multimodal nature of it usually a lot of the times. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the data that you needed to work with or the use case in general. Just tell us really what you were trying to do.
Yeah, it started with an interesting conversation between a former coworker and I, who were really good friends, and he had spent some time working in genomic sequencing, and the idea was we have a lot of data within genomics, right? A lot of data that can be turned on. Your blood carries so much, and it talks about DNA storage and all that kind of stuff. Beside the point, um, but in order to kind of packetize or kind of analyze that and provide an interaction with that from a wet lab scientist or a forensic researcher or any of these type of things. You need to have some sort of reliability or some sort of platform in order to build that on. And obviously, there are some great providers out there like Oxford Nanopore and Broad Institute that have created things like variable cell formats, right? So these are the encapsulations of those genomes, right? So it's a listing of all these different um, sequences, genomic sequences underneath it, and they vary in size and whatnot. After talking to my friend, and he's like, it'd be really, really cool if we could come up with something that, enabled some of these workflows, enabled a genomic workflow, from initiation, from capture, if you will, at the moment of dropping, the sample into a sequencer to the end stage where we're starting to look at the analysis of these things. And so that requires high bandwidth, a large amount of bandwidth, low latency, the ability to rapidly recover or retrieve results once they've been instantiated, and also an ability to interact with the tools that are surrounding it, right? So it's base calling software, it's different primitives within Python, scikit, NumPy, all these different type of things, right? So when you start to look at it, it starts to look like a data analytics workload. It starts to look like something that mirrors a lot of the things that we try to set up for uh, you know RAG or other types of data pipelines in this. And so that kind of landed on this discussion of, well, there's a couple different ways to go around this, but core to that is that relational database side, or that database side that's going to maintain the continuity of everything, and ease of entry and reducing friction wise. We'd like that to be as comprehensive as possible, right? So it contains our vectorization layer, contains our, and is scalable enough and can be spawned out enough. And then, we can do some esoteric stuff from there, but we have to start with a solid foundation for what we're doing. So.
Well, one of the issues that researchers tend to face is they have to bring in data from different sources. I don't know if this is something you had to do, but usually LanceDB is pretty useful when you have to ingest different modalities from different
Mhm.
locations. Whether it's object blobs or wherever else they may be coming from, other departments, other teams, and stuff like that. I don't know if you've really had to do any of that on this use case.
So the good news is, at least for the initial kind of call it MVP or just baseline test vehicle, right, is that we were already dealing with a fixed format called VCF, so the variable cell format. There are some different types of encapsulation things out there. Different base callers have different variations. So Broad Institute has theirs. But an industry standard is VCF. So we didn't really have to deal with much outside of that. However, to your point, um, there are large ingestion opportunities. I know there of one particular entity that's in uh, Asia Pac that has over 6 terabytes of just raw genomic data that hasn't been refined. And ingesting that becomes a challenge. There's other different pockets of these things that are around. So being able to kind of normalize, again, part of a call it ETL, call it whatever you want to, but part of that ingestion is bring it in, normalizing it to a singular base, then doing your data curation and refinement as well, because there might be a whole bunch of junk in there.
Yep.
If we were blessed in this case, we could use 1,000. I think it's called 1,000 samples. It's hosted by University of California, Santa Clara, I think, UCSC. And they have 1,000 genomes, actually. That's what it's called. So they have a representative set that's out there that we could do some of our initial testing on without having to go to live capture. So thankfully that part was resolved, but future iterations would include a data transformation layer as well.
So, by the way, for some of the people listening, genome sequencing, could you give me maybe explain like in five, what is it for, and who gets the benefit of the knowledge and the insights?
Sure. I'll use something that's probably a little less painful than what we've experienced over the last 5 years or so. Um, an example actually came from Oxford Nanopore, one of the first NVIDIA GTC conferences I ever attended, which was in Munich. But the concept was a disease that ended up in cassava fields in sub-Saharan Africa, and what we tried to discover, what Oxford Nanopore tried to help enable discover, was what was causing this, right? So understanding what a healthy cassava plant genome looked like and looking for derivations or deviations from that genome to try to understand the undercurrents or the underpinnings of either a disease that was emerging or different types of effects on what would be considered a healthy or productive agricultural output, right? So in that case, you have a what they call a golden sample, which is what we consider to be healthy and normative, right, within a certain deviation of. And then you take samples and you basically will sequence them across a grid. So liquefy, sequence, separate, put it across a grid, and then the resulting output is a match. Is basically a baseline of these different genomes, and then you try to match them against the golden genome to understand any kind of deviations or derivations there. So that's the very, very high level approach to that, and you can get very, very dirty from there. But it's, viral loads and other things like that, like we went through with COVID, would be another example, right? Trying to understand what's out there. So that's one use for it.
No, this is great. Absolutely amazing. And the things that you mentioned, kind of the workflow in a high level, were there any features, any aspects of LanceDB that kind of match those requirements? So whether it's embedding, vectorization, search, maybe re-ranking, just all kinds of things that the search engine can do. And then there's the storage, of course, as well. What kind of things, what kind of aspects and features of LanceDB work for you in that sense?
So embedding and search were two huge principles of that. I'd also argue, even from an infrastructure standpoint, the ability to self-host as well as to potentially look at, from a production side, the hosted version of LanceDB was pretty critical to that decision. Again, when you tend to evaluate products, you're looking at or evaluate solutions, you're looking for friction, what's going to cause me the least amount of money output at the initial point, but also something that can fit easily within the confines of regulatory environments or geopolitical environments and so on and so forth. So from an infrastructure standpoint, the ability that I could stand this up in a container, could leverage it, alongside the rest of my workflow was hugely important. The second thing being, if I went into production, and we were looking at some examples out of DigitalOcean, for example, is running our Docker cluster or production Docker cluster for proof of concept. I could tie this to an extant service, something that y'all would host or otherwise. Um, the vectorization part becomes important because one of the aspects of it that's not been finished yet, but is being worked on, is this idea of being able to query the data and basically ask an agent to go look at the data and say, what are you seeing? Is there anything that you're noticing that I'm not able to pick up as a data scientist? And so part of that is we have to figure out how to chunk, embed, and vectorize that data in order to be able to have those questions being asked against whatever agent we choose to use. um, and then it's also becomes part of an ongoing training set as well. It's like as we introduce new genome types or as we look at, different projects and whatever, we want to be able to in turn that back and use it for training for a very, very narrowly approachable. I don't know if that's the right term, but look at a very, very narrow kind of application or a agent interface, right? That would deal with that data specifically. So those are a couple dimensions that I looked at least from the evaluation standpoint.
Forgive me if I'm asking too many details, but the whole agent choosing the
Mhm.
tool is very curious. So, what would be a typical query or a scenario under which the agent chooses the search tool and runs semantics?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the questions that we were originally trying to figure out the schema for this, and this I think still in flight. But one of the questions that we want to have is just a very simple: show me what are the deviations from the golden genome, and have it be able to retrieve that, and have it retrieve, using natural language. I think that's the other principle here. Is like a lot of these interfaces are driven through complexity and through scientific language versus natural language approaches, right? So having something that picks up on the corpus of show me deviations, golden, right, and being able to kind of pull that across, is one of the real basic kind of prompts and questions that we would be asking for, or we would be tuning for as well. As with anything that has to deal with people, what we want to assure is that there's always a human in the loop. But some of these initial kind of questions they can be serviced, they can be handled by a very lightweight type agentic approach, right? Nothing that I'm not going to ask it for a a prescription regimen or anything like that, because I do firmly believe that we have a role to play in this particular bit. But that would be the kind of prompting, or other things that kind of expand from there. If you're showing me CGAB genome sequencing or DNA types, is there anything that shows an aberration based on the inverse of that, or these type of things? So you know generally just trying to use language that's
Okay.
flexible.
One question that I've been waiting to ask you is, I think I may have actually mentioned this in an indirect way, ease of adoption, kind of fitting in the workflow. One of the things that researchers want to do is, the least want to do is become data engineers. But when they're working with projects like these at large scale, they eventually have to become one and start wrangling with various pipelines and things. And This is the unfortunate situation. This is actually where LanceDB starts to shine as we develop the platform and see what people are doing. But there are problems. So could you tell us a little bit about like your entire kind of ecosystem that you're working with? Because you said you're working with a regulated environment, right?
Yeah.
Are there any adjacent products or adjacent things that you needed to fit this into?
So the from the onset of design, I included in, so I can give you like the tool stack is fairly basic at this point. Again, adopting the whole, vibe coding your way to success thing, and I somewhat put that tongue in cheek in that there are also developers behind the scenes here. It's not just, living large on GPT 4.0 or Sonnet or Opus, but one of the initial, establishments here is that everything we did had to conform to FDA, FDA standards, right? So that was written into the PRD from the get-go. So in actuality, I want to say the first 80 hours of the project, code time, was related to ensuring consistency, viability, reliability of the code set such that it wouldn't fall afoul of the rubrics that the FDA requires for human touching or scientific machinery or medical machinery, right? So I think people skip over that a lot, whereas they don't understand that if you're going to go into regulatory environments, if you don't have that from the onset, you're going to miss the boat and you're going to spend a lot of time refactoring or reinitializing code. The second thing we did is I did just kind of a gross scale query and said, all right, how does this have to be contained? What do I need to wrap this into? So the choice of using, containers versus discrete servers versus, X, Y, and Z. Can I do this with functions versus other things? Whatever. So looking out there, and I have a previous history with DigitalOcean. I've used them for many, many years, both as like signal proxy types and other things. So, going out there and taking a look at their infrastructure and saying, all right, I can run this self-contained here before I ever approach and go to Broad or Oxford Nanopore with the POC. I can go and I can actually test on viable current generation hardware that has this stuff in place. So compliance from a front end, compliance and regulatory kind of on mindset from the get-go, looking at infrastructures that are designed around that. Again, I never got to the point where I inspected the hosted LanceDB side for any kind of regulatory compliance perspectives, but that would necessarily be a part of anyone's adoption in the back end. Front end's all Python. Uh, there is a project underway right now, which I'm touching on when I get an opportunity to. And obviously, been a little bit busy with the other part of my day job at this point to look at Condon Python, right? So more scientific and parallelism oriented version of Python, which kind of abstracts some of that and adds a little bit more performance into the overall mix and is a little bit more secure. Um, but these were tend to be the tool sets that were used in that and the infrastructure that was used in that evaluation stuff. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I like the regulatory part a lot. Um, one of the biggest things when people come in, they're asking about the quality of self-hosting, security, data sovereignty. They're asking about whether we meet all the requirements, whether it's on the European side or on the American side. I think this is probably the question number one. So you're absolutely right there. With regards to the entire project, how did it end up? How was it received? How is it going now?
Well, my buddy and I are still talking, so that's good.
Yeah.
So you can maintain friendships through an open source development project. I tend to look at him as more the researcher and me as a doer in this particular case. I mean, he's got even a couple of patents in this spot, so like it's really here for him. And it's a passion project for him. I've since changed jobs, again, former coworker as it were. So things have been kind of
Mhm.
riding on the in sitting in state for a little bit of time here.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I get some time after I get back from PTO to kind of pick up little bits and pieces here. I've been doing a little bit of work on the side on another project, which is a kind of graph memory project, if you will, just to get some experience on the refactoring side for some of the Condon Python stuff. So I've been circling back around. I take a look at the code base every once in a while. I go, I think I want to improve this. My brother, who's a software engineer, has been popping in there, and he's more of a stickler for code formatting and structs and linting than I am at this point. So he's been going there, tidying up the repo and making sure things are done. Um, Hopefully we'll have it's all in a private repo right now on GitHub. There's a public version of it that's not, that may be a 30 percentile kind of thing. The internal one has at least has some tests that are running against it, showing some performance gains, just using all sample and test data. So my goal is that we would have this, and the ultimate goal is not to make money off of this by any stretch of imagination. This is open source. It is fully, MIT license compliant. We're not looking. It's looking to basically test and prove out the concept that this is something that can be done. It can be done in a rigorous and reliable type way, which is
Yep.
not what you're seeing a lot of, especially when we code tools that suddenly show up and disappear in a couple of weeks. So yeah, like I said, hoping to pick it up a little bit more as my time relents a little bit, and I get my feet out, and get my feet under me from the current gig. So,
One of the things we'll do after this in the comments, we'll be sharing your projects and your profile, your biography. But before we do any of this, we should still talk a little bit about what you're planning on doing. Are you working on any other large projects? Something that you want to let the audience know.
yeah, I mean, my dedication, like I said, I took over marketing for ML Commons, and a lot of what you and I had talked about before is this idea that we're better as a community. Um, all these different bits and pieces, competing against each other. I mean, competition is good. Don't worry. It gets us. The rising tide, so to speak, raises all boats. Especially if we were humble enough to kind of accept that. And I think this is one of the big things that I was excited about ML Commons for, is that it's trying to be ubiquitous for everybody. Our contributions into schema.org, for example, for machine language definitions and enabling machines to talk better to each other, enabling what we're trying to do to be more efficient and be more productive. And a lot of these things are exciting to me, and that's kind of why I've been so stoked to be a part of the organization and work on this stuff. Those tend to be big projects. I mean, it's constantly an ongoing cycle, and as we get further into it, your LanceDB is a valuable part of that ecosystem. Like, maybe we don't talk enough about it, but we're starting to look at endpoints. We're starting to look at where does that data end up. We're starting to look at the places that how users interface with that data even, and why that matters. And so these are parts of the bigger meta, if you will, inside of AI that becomes so very, very important to all of us. But no, the big projects right now are just, trying to push forward and understand and do my job to the best of my ability, and have great conversations with folks like yourself, and especially
Absolutely.
that exist in the ecosystem, right? Because we can all learn from each other, and maybe not in the ways that we expected.
NML Commons is really exciting. I think what we're going to do a little bit about in this blog follow up, we're going to talk about ML Commons in your role.
Yeah,
Overall, I think there's a really great fit. I think the fact that you guys discovered us tells us a lot about the nature of our product and kind of the people that are interested in the workflows they're doing. Overall, we couldn't have hoped for a better user than you. Well, you do research, you do a little bit of engineering, workflows. You're a marketer too, which shows you're a great person to interview. Let me tell you that. I worked with a lot of engineers over the years, so I have to really say this is a big deal for me. But overall, you're a man of many trades, and we really appreciate that. We appreciate that you were able to pick up LanceDB with all of the things that you're doing. So that tells us that the product is friendly in a way. There's still lots to do on the UX and UI side,
sure.
but it's nice that you were able to discover it and pick it up.
Yeah, your documentation. I didn't even mention your documentation, but that's another one of my screening criteria. If you don't have documentation, I can't use it. I don't want to have to guess at the end result, right? And this was one of the things I think was key, is that outside of a couple of other, particular things that I interacted with, LanceDB's documentation was probably one of the better ones that was out there. It was truly like let's actually get you to use our product, and here's how, versus just some of the throw and go type mentality that a lot of these tools generally have. Like, here's all the code, go figure it out. So
Totally. Yeah. Well, we still have to do a bit of work. I'm a documentation person, and I look at it sometimes, and I think either I'm messing up or something's wrong. I don't know, but I have to. It never ends, the whole doc story.
It does. It does.
But yeah, I mean, Dave, this isn't over. This is just a talk. We're gonna do a bit of a blog. So, if you watch the video first, check out what's beneath the video, check out the text, and we'll be covering Dave and his use case and all the stuff that Dave's doing. This is an inaugural LanceDB interview, so I have to congratulate you on being the first person, the first user. Big deal for us,
Yep.
really. So again, thank you for being an open source user, and thank you for sharing the message.
Absolutely. No, happy to be.
Thanks very much.